In this episode, you will find out the one key sign it's time to leave an unhappy marriage.
Welcome to Women Winning Divorce, the podcast helping successful women navigate divorce with dignity so you can protect yourself, your children, and your assets. I'm Heather Quick, founding attorney at Florida Women's Law Group, where women win at life.
This week, we had Lauren Auer on the show, and we had a great conversation about making a choice to leave a marriage, how to identify trauma, and what brain spotting is and how it can help you. Welcome to this week's episode of Women Winning Divorce. I'm Heather Quick, owner and attorney at Florida Women's Law Group. Today, Lauren Auer is joining us. Lauren is a therapist and founder of Steadfast Counseling. Lauren has experience in brain spotting, EMDR, Reiki, and is a certified clinical trauma professional, and much more. Today, Lauren and I will be discussing how to leave an unhappy marriage, how to identify signs of trauma, and what brain spotting is and how it can help you. Welcome to the show, Lauren.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, I mean, you have so much experience, but we would love to have you share a little bit about your professional journey and how you got to where you are with your own practice.
Sure. Yeah. So I knew for a long time in my life that I always wanted to be a therapist. My grandfather was a therapist. And it's actually kind of funny because when I was going into undergrad, I was looking at all of the schooling I would need and oh my gosh, how am I going to pay for all of that? So I actually kind of switched gears at that point and went into criminal justice and sociology for my undergrad. Because I thought, okay, I only need 4 years for that. It's kind of similar, whatever. And during that time, I got an internship at a juvenile detention center. So I was working with kids that were basically in jail. And something that stood out to me so much about that experience was how much trauma those kids had and how little it was being talked about, if at all. And it just bothered me a lot. Like I was like, why aren't we addressing that? Like, I feel like that's the root of a lot of why they're even here in the first place. So anyway, that kind of spurred me to go back into the counseling field. I ended up getting my master's. I ended up working with kids and adults and families that had experienced trauma, both as offenders and as victims. And from there, I worked at a rape crisis center. So I got to see a lot of immediate, like right now trauma, but we also offered free counseling for all ages for anybody that had ever experienced any type of abuse at any point in their life. So we also had clients that were maybe much later in life and had experienced trauma years and years and years ago. So kind of getting to see the differences between this just happened today crisis trauma versus the healing from trauma that happened way down the road, and what that looks like. And then I also became the director of that agency. So at that point, I was doing speaking and trainings to police and school staff and people that have experienced, working with people that had trauma, as well as their own trauma from dealing with those populations, and then supporting my staff that had their own trauma and working with clients that had trauma, and just really seeing trauma from like literally every kind of angle you can possibly imagine.
Yeah.
So, it really gave me this view of what trauma is, where people get stuck, why they get stuck, how people actually heal, all of that. And so that led me to open my own practice, which is where I'm at now.
That is quite the journey. That's amazing. And so very interesting because I think, I don't think that it's talked about as much as it should be, because there are some things where people, clearly identify as trauma, but I think we leave a lot of things out that really can have a traumatic effect and can really affect you. And so I think that's great that you do that and help your clients so much. Now, today we're here to talk about the consequences of staying in an unhappy relationship.
Yeah.
And trauma can certainly be a piece of being in an unhappy relationship,
Mhm.
for sure. So, I mean, how do you define trauma, and how to
Yeah.
help our listeners understand that? How is that defined?
I feel like it's one of those things that is misunderstood. Like people hear the word trauma and automatically think of, a war and big natural disaster, which of course is trauma, right?
Yes.
But it's also not always those big scary events. It's really any experience that overwhelms our ability to cope. So it could be a one-time thing, or it could be ongoing stuff. It's like where our
Hmm.
bodies and brains get stuck in some sort of survival mode, and that's even when the danger is past. And so my personal favorite definition of trauma is if it's anything that happens that's too much too fast, um, too, what is it? Too much too fast, um, not enough for too long, or
Oh, okay.
too, or like the lack of something. So, um, little things that happen over time, or not having the support you need. So even the lack of something, like
Hmm. Hmm.
neglect, right? That's not a big scary event that happens. It's not like you're something dangerous that's happening to you technically, but it's the lack of love, it's the lack of support.
Right. Hmm.
So all of those things can be held as trauma in our bodies.
And what then are the symptoms of
Mhm.
trauma? So you've experienced this, but maybe you don't know because it wasn't like,
Yeah.
I wasn't in war, I wasn't in, a fire, but yet they've experienced, these things over and over. And what would be some of the symptoms of trauma?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can look so many ways for so many different people. Of course, there's, what I would say are like the quote obvious ones, like flashbacks and nightmares,
Yeah.
anxiety, depression, feeling on edge all the time. But there's also the like bodily stuff, aches, pains, digestive issues. Like a lot of times, like trauma creates inflammation in the system, stress in the system. And if you're not actually dealing with it, it can create more physical health problems. But I also always like to point out that as a trauma therapist that has worked with so many different people, I have had and do have so many clients that anybody on the street would look at them and go, wow, they have it all together. They are so high achieving. They,
Hmm.
are they've got it all figured out, and so sometimes even like somebody throwing themselves into work or being a perfectionist or being really outgoing or being really successful, like sometimes that is a symptom of trauma too. So I guess it's one of those things that all in all, there isn't really this list of things, but anything
Hmm.
somebody is doing to kind of suppress or move past some sort of internal experience is a symptom.
Okay. So now let's shift a little bit because we are talking about consequences of staying in an unhappy marriage. So how, how do you recognize that, when that you're unhappy with your relationship?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think something that often happens in terms of relationships is because it's kind of like that long overtime thing, right? So of course there are situations where maybe the marriage is great, but there's this major event that happens, maybe a significant death in the immediate family that is this huge trauma and they just can't get past it, right? But
Right.
oftentimes it's more of these subtle things that happen over time that kind of build upon each other. And so I think sometimes it's difficult to fully pinpoint it. I think of that reference of, it's like the frog that's in the lukewarm pot of water and it's heating up and boiling, and the frog doesn't even fully realize when it's at danger level, versus a frog that jumps into an already boiling pot of water and is like danger and jumps out. I think sometimes with those prolonged relationships, it feels like the first thing, like that lukewarm pot that's slowly simmering and heating up, that it can be hard to recognize and like really pinpoint what these shifts and these changes are. So I think a lot of times though, we do as humans have this like gut feeling, this intuition, maybe just like not really wanting to be around each other, avoiding conversation, or starting to feel feelings of content, or just frustrations that feel heightened. Those are things to look out for. Dreading coming home, all of that kind of stuff. And there isn't always this like, I dread coming home because we are always screaming at each other. Like sometimes it is more just this like, I don't feel like this is for me. I feel like I'm unhappy. So it can be really subtle. Yeah.
But it makes sense. It makes sense exactly what you say. Now, why would a woman choose to stay in an unhappy relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not that simple to just leave, right? Lawyer, you see that, like it can be, it disrupts so much. Sometimes it's easier to kind of swallow the discomfort or unhappiness to just keep that status quo, because the alternative maybe looks like splitting up finances, splitting up custody, maybe moving, like, there's so much to go through within that making that choice is not just like a simple thing for most people. It can also be people's values, people's principles, or, they have hope for change, or maybe it'll be better when, there's all sorts of things that I think can keep people in those situations. And they're all pretty valid reasons.
And, and that's true, right? Because, and a lot of times, we can come up with a lot of reasons to stay, a lot of reasons to go, but yet, it takes a lot, because then it's going to be a change, and then it's going to, and that is the unknown. But what are some potential consequences of staying in an unhappy relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can kind of look like a slow poison for people. Like it can erode your self-esteem over time, or just feeling like you have agency or control over your life if you've just kind of thrown in the towel and you're just kind of going through the motions. That can lead to depression and anxiety, physical health problems. And of course, if there's kids in the picture, they can pick up on it too. They can learn those unhealthy relationship patterns. You could be teaching them that it's okay to be unhappy, or that ultimately happiness doesn't really matter. There's all of these messages that get sent, even if they're not explicitly being said or taught, that can be picked up on in those situations.
Yeah. Very good point. And that leads to this, like, okay, let's talk about this. So do you think staying in a relationship that you are unhappy in long term, maybe, I'm going to wait till we get the kids through school and they move out till they're adults or something, but do you think that, consciously knowing you're in an unhappy relationship and staying, do you think that has an effect on your ability to maybe finding a happier relationship later?
Yeah, I definitely do. I mean, the long-term effects of that, if you're in this position where you're training yourself essentially to accept less or to doubt your worth, it can make you cynical about love or relationships or any affection of, well, this is just what it's like, I guess, like it's that stuff you see in the movies isn't real or whatever, to where you lower your standards, or you don't have hope for those things. And really unlearning those patterns takes a lot of work.
Yeah. That is such a good point. Yeah, I bet. And now, do you find that women battle staying or staying versus leaving more than men?
And comparison to men.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there's, as progressive as we're moving towards, there's still a lot of societal expectation around the role of the woman and keeping things together and keeping the house moving. Of course, that's not everywhere, but I do think that,
Yeah.
is something that doesn't just go away. And sometimes it's deeper ingrained. Sometimes there's economic factors at play there. I mean, again, as much as I think society is moving towards more equality, like the numbers still show that men make more, and there's definitely not equality with all of that. I think too, a lot of times just how women are raised in regards to men. Sometimes they're taught to be peacemakers or to put other people first, and that's a positive value that they bring to the table. And there's also a lot of fears when leaving around that, especially, if like they're so invested in love being a mother, and then thinking about how they're not going to be able to be around their kids 100% of the time can be really scary. Those sorts of things can, I think, definitely cause a woman to have a little bit more pause than men. Yeah.
Yeah, and that makes sense for sure. Now, from your perspective, when do you think it's time for someone to leave versus work it out?
Yeah, I mean, there's big major things, right? If there's abuse, whether it's physical, emotional, financial, whatever, that oftentimes that's not just a one-off thing. It typically escalates. Maybe if you've tried therapy, if you've tried communicating and nothing is really changing, and you really feel like, you've really given it what you can. If you've lost yourself completely, if both people are willing to do the work, and I think if both people are able to really make steps and progress, that of course it's not always this progression of just upward all the time. Sometimes it ebbs and flows, but if more often than not, there is progress, or, when you find yourself in a similar situation that you've had arguments about in the past, maybe those arguments are still happening, but you're able to come back and go, I shouldn't have responded that way. I'm really trying to work on that. More apologetic or owning things or trying to shift those patterns is showing, I think, that investment. And without that, I think it can be really difficult.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. Because I think that's one of the things people do always want to know. I think when they're even almost asking it, they know, but they've got to come to that resolution. As to, okay, I'm ready to take that step. Like, I may know it's time to leave. I just don't know that I can do it today, but maybe I can plan for it. Now, let me ask you this, because you have so much experience with trauma. How can unresolved trauma affect someone's decision to stay or leave a marriage?
Yeah, I think that's a huge thing. So, a lot of times the patterns that come out in an unhealthy relationship has roots that preceded the relationship, whether it seems like it or not. Trauma can make you feel unworthy of love or terrified of abandonment, or it can keep you stuck in like a fight, flight, freeze mode. For instance, like if somebody tends to just shut down all the time, and that's like their automatic response, or somebody tends to get really angry and yell, and that's their automatic response, whatever those things are, a lot of times those automatic responses that we have are rooted back a lot farther. And those in and of themselves can cause a lot of problems within relationships and kind of expand. So yeah, it might show up all sorts of different ways in relationships. But if there's, attachment stuff around family or feeling abandoned or feeling cared or loved for. That could come up as jealousy or control issues or emotional walls, all sorts of stuff. So, we're all humans. We all lived life, and life isn't easy for anybody. We all deal with stuff, some bigger than others, whatever, but everybody has events and things in their life that impact how they interact in the world and what they find valuable and what other people see in them and what they bring to the table. Like all of these things are really shaped throughout time. And so I think it can be really valuable to look at that stuff when it comes to having marital problems.
Which leads to my next question. When should you seek help from a therapist?
I mean, I'm kind of biased, but I think everybody should have a therapist. But yeah, I mean, I think something that I think is hard as a therapist is that, a lot of times people are coming to therapy because they're at that last ditch effort.
Right.
Which I get it,
Mhm.
it's a time commitment. It can be hard to find a good therapist fit, scheduling. Like there's so many reasons why it's not always that simple. But, I think that a lot of times when you wait till it's that last ditch effort, so much damage has been done. I don't think it's impossible.
Yeah, right.
I really think with that, if it is at that point, it really takes both people. Are they both willing to have these conversations and change? Because if only one of them is, or their heart's just not fully in it, or they're just before we get divorced, maybe we should just try counseling or whatever, and they're not actually
Yeah. It's usually a box to check.
yeah.
But you're right. Maybe, yeah, you don't want to wait till it's too far gone because you can't take back the things that were said. Those feelings, sometimes it might be too much to overcome.
Yeah, I think, and little
And so
things
that makes
become
sense.
big things. So being
They
able to
do. They
address
do.
them before they become big things
Hmm.
can be really valuable. Even if it's our marriage is pretty good, but let's just see a therapist a couple times and just kind of have a check-in and see where we're
Yeah.
at. And if we need to do that again, we'll do it again, and it's just sometimes that is a really good place to be, because even then, even in the most healthy marriages, there's still differences in how you communicate or things that are frustrating or whatever that I think anybody can work
Hmm.
on at those levels, even if it's just a short thing or a temporary thing.
And I think this is a good spot to talk about it because I think you're right. And sometimes, and I'm not saying it doesn't work, right? We've had many, many women over the years. They've come to see us and then they're like, wow, I wanted to educate myself and have an understanding of the process, but I want to still work on it. So,
Mhm.
and I'm not saying that didn't work. However, I think it would be so much better to reach out before you get to the point where you really want to talk to a divorce attorney.
Yeah.
Because then a lot of things have happened. A lot has happened that then now you're in that office versus the opportunity to learn to communicate a little bit better with your spouse through therapy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then maybe understand, because I would bet, and I don't know, but there's probably a lot of people out there um that there was some trauma, but they don't even really realize it. They don't identify it as that, but then they have these patterns that,
Mhm.
like you said, are a result of all these things. And so, two people are trying to communicate and get and work things out, but they don't really understand maybe where the other person is coming from and why. And frankly, they may, not understand why that is such a trigger for them either.
Mhm.
And I think that, when you're already in an unhappy marriage, like we're talking about here, one of the consequences of staying is that it might be too far gone for therapy, which doesn't mean for the individual, right? It's
Right.
never too late for you individually, but the marriage in and of itself, it might not be repairable, like you said.
Yeah.
Too much has happened.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of times, again, those things that feel maybe small or
Yeah.
insignificant are really just like symptoms of a deeper thing. And it can seem like one-off little fights or whatever that you just move on
Mhm.
from. But if you're not actually resolving it or figuring out like what was it about um, that really bothered me, like
Yeah.
let's just say it's I don't know, something like forgetting an anniversary, right? It's like that's a thing, whatever, you can move past it, you can apologize, but maybe like the core of that, what somebody was actually feeling was maybe, um, uncared for or unimportant. And if there's other times, even little times where they feel those same feelings of uncared for, unimportant, of, a couple years down the road, they're noticing that their partner always, gets themselves a portion of dinner and never brings them or never asks what they can do to help or never, and then those feelings of being unimportant that are really at the core of that, it's like those become so bigger and it becomes this like this is just how this person is, or this, it becomes this belief, or it becomes what's wrong with me, I must be flawed or whatever, where it's this bigger thing
Right.
and not always this one-off thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, you share a lot on your social media about brain spotting therapy. So please tell us. I would love to understand a little bit more about that. What is brain spotting?
Yeah. So it's a therapy modality that really helps with specific things like really anything. But it's really helping to process specific trauma responses and those stored emotions. And really kind of like the overarching reason it works is kind of like what I was just giving with that example of the Fred and the anniversary and not
Uh-huh.
feeling cared for, right? I think that a lot of times in talk therapy, we can go in and we can talk to the therapist. This is what went on this week. This is why I was upset. And maybe this is how I could respond. Here's some communication tips, whatever, which is great. But brain spotting is really kind of targeting like the deeper thing there. And it kind of like people can feel really stuck in talk therapy because it's like, well, this thing happened again. And you're kind of just talking about it every time. And how do
Over
you
and
cope
over
with
and
it
over.
and
Yeah.
whatever, instead of really figuring out maybe that like when that thing happened and you were feeling upset, like why you were feeling that intense magnitude of being upset. Like, what is it about that, or why you're reacting that way? And so, brain spotting, it follows neuroscience around how our nervous system and our body, which is how we experience the world and sensations and emotions and responses, that fight, flight, freeze, whatever it is, like that's all in our nervous system, which is attached to our brain, and our eyes are directly attached to the brain. It's the only part of our brain that will ever see the outside world. It's the amount of information we take in on a regular basis is insane, right? So it draws on that neuroscience. It sounds kind of crazy, it sounds kind of woo-woo, but basically where you look affects how you feel. And when you're talking through things, when you're making sense of things, telling a story, all of that in talk therapy, you're using your prefrontal cortex, which is like the logical part of your brain that can tell a story, that can make sense of stuff. But when we're reacting to things, when we're feeling emotions, that's not happening in your prefrontal cortex. That's happening a lot deeper in your brain. And so those things come up before the logic. So like if he forgets your anniversary and you fly off the handle. And then later you're like feeling maybe kind of embarrassed about how you reacted or whatever. It's like that reaction was automatic though. You know, you logic it later, but the reaction was automatic. And if that reaction caused hurt or a bigger problem or a bigger blow up, you know, it's possible that you can logically say, yeah, I shouldn't have done that. I don't want to do that anymore. That caused more issues to scream and freak out and yell and throw something. But, you know, maybe next time there's something similar. It's like, even though you know it's going to make things worse, it doesn't really matter because in those moments, you're not in your prefrontal cortex, you're not in the logical part, and you might just be reacting, right? And that can go way back to all sorts of things. And so a lot of times people get this stuckness around, well, I don't want to do this, or I know I shouldn't feel this way, or I can't figure out why I react this way, but I do it and I don't want to do it. And in those moments, like I know all the things, but I keep doing it, or whatever the case may be. And so brain spotting is really this technique where it focuses on kind of bringing up that feeling, that automatic reaction, and where you physically are feeling that in your body. It's engaging those parts of your brain that are actually online. And where you are looking when you're doing that, it changes the intensity of that emotion, which I know sounds so crazy, but it's just, it works. And it's amazing how when you pinpoint that, you know, the stuff that I've seen people work through in these sessions is just incredible, where they're coming back going like, yeah, I didn't react that way that time. Like, that's weird. You know, it's just, it's really, it kind of takes, it helps you process it at the level that it's actually stored in your system so that those automatic reactions aren't so severe.
Now let's talk about the highlighter video of yours that went viral. Like, what is that technique? Because that was a really cool video for our listeners.
Yeah. So basically in this video, I'm just holding a highlighter up in front of the camera. You can use anything, your finger, you know, something sitting on your desk. And again, with how the brain is so connected to the nervous system and how we're physically feeling in our body. I shared this technique that comes from brain spotting around like reducing anxiety and panic. And in the video, I just use the highlighter to look at the highlighter that's right in front of my eyes, and then look beyond it at the wall or whatever is beyond it further away, and then back to the highlighter, and then beyond it and back, and kind of doing that back and forth. And what's actually happening there is with those different eye movements, it's really engaging those parts of your nervous system that is calming down whatever the racing thought pattern is, the brain. You know, you can't simultaneously do the eye movements focused in that way while also experiencing whatever cognitive function is going on. It just kind of like, it's soothing, it shuts it down. And I also like to say, like, for some, as many, I don't know how many comments are on that, like 90% of them are like, this was amazing, it worked so well, like, holy cow, this was amazing. And then like 10% of them are like, didn't work, like stupid science, this made it worse or whatever. So like, of course, like all these techniques, there are some people that'll resonate with it, some that won't, but you know, it's drawing on just like the nervous system regulation in our body. Yeah.
Well, and for those of you who are listening, we will definitely put a link in the show notes, but you know, it makes sense. You're just trying to now. So I'm the lawyer, not the scientist, and I have interviewed so many people, right? So I know I'm going to incorrectly use science words, right? My daughter's a biology major, so after things, I'm like, I learned about this, but I'm going to, in my, you know, amateur way. Is that like creating new neural pathways and new ways that will then help affect your reaction? Is that an accurate
Kind of, yeah. Well,
kind of?
yeah, the highlighter video, that's just really kind of like a quick like grounding technique. That's not, you're not
Okay.
doing any like real processing or real, um, it's a technique that draws off of brain spotting and the eye movements for that reason, but it's not,
Okay.
you're not actually like processing through trauma there. If you're gonna
Understand.
actually do like real brain spotting, it's working with a brain spotting therapist that knows that it's a lot more complex, I guess, than that, and setting it up and being able to get all of those things in place. But yes, it is creating those new neural pathways, and your body kind of holds on to signals. Your brain wants to keep you safe
Right.
at the end of the day. So it's just these things can go way back. Let's say if you grew up in a household where there was a lot of arguing and fighting, maybe the way that you automatically coped with that when you were little was to just kind of like space out and go to a different place in your head and kind of shut down. And that was really adaptive then, probably because that's what worked
Mhm.
for you. But then if you're now an adult and in a relationship, and every time there's distress or overwhelm or whatever in the marriage, or your kids throwing a fit or something, and like, even though you maybe realize that that's not the best thing to do, it might just be this like ingrained automatic thing that just kicks in when there's
Right.
distress. And it's hard, even if people know that, even if they're able to say, yes, I do that because my parents fought and it was adaptive back then, I know I can make sense of it. That doesn't always mean that they can shut it off or that they can stop doing it.
Right.
And that's where a lot of times people do get stuck. So these things like brain spotting is actually kind of going beyond that logic and helping actually
Mm-hmm.
calm those responses down in the brain so that it's connected, and you're able to have a lot more power over those things.
And that sounds amazing. I love there's just so many new modalities, therapies out there, right? To help people depending on what they're struggling with. Now, for our listeners, how can they find someone who specializes in brain spotting?
Yeah. So brainspotting.com is kind of the hub that anybody
Okay.
that has completed training, certification, all of that, there is a full list of people on that website, and you can, filter for your area and that kind of thing. So that's definitely a good way to ensure that they have the proper training.
Okay.
Also just any of the like therapy search sites, like psychologytoday.com is one of the
Mhm.
more popular ones. And that's where therapists can put their profile on there, and you can filter for your area and the type of issue you're dealing with, the type of insurance you have, if you want a male or female or whatever. And you can also filter for like brain spotting. You can put that in
Okay.
there. Um, and so, yeah, that's a good place to start as well. I think, there is, I guess, a little bit of caution there. Like, I would double check that they're on the brain spotting website, because people could technically
Mm.
check that box without actually having proper training. But even, I think, it's becoming more and more popular, more and more known. There are brain spotting therapists all over the world, all over the US, everywhere. And I think too, with, telehealth, you can do it virtually. And because of, that, I think opens up a lot of doors that you can work with somebody that doesn't live necessarily right next to you that does it. So that's great. And also, I know we didn't talk fully about EMDR, but EMDR is very similar to brain spotting in a lot of ways. It kind of targets those same brain areas.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I feel like, a little bit more well known than brain spotting, but it kind of has the same function. And because it's a little more, I don't know, it's a little bit ahead of brain spotting, there are more therapists that are trained in EMDR. So that's also kind of like, if you're looking for that type of therapy specifically, or if you're looking for what I've described as becoming unstuck at those levels,
Uh-huh.
really like EMDR or brain spotting are kind of both going to be able to point you in that direction.
That's great. And now I have to ask you another question that you shared on your social media the idea of real versus fake or store-bought dopamine. Would you please share with me and our listeners what does that mean?
Yeah. Okay. Well, so I mean, dopamine is dopamine, right? But like the fake quote dopamine is more of like I'm referencing like those quick hits, like the impulse buy, the getting a like on social media, you know, whatever, getting yourself a little treat, like a little coffee or whatever. That's like, it's nice. It's like a little bit of dopamine. It's quick. It makes you happy. Right. But like that real dopamine comes from more like the genuine connection or like bigger achievement, creativity, those more sustainable, long lasting things. But it's so easy to reach for the quote fake dopamine when we're lacking the real stuff. But, you know, it's not that the fake quote stuff is bad. Like those things can be really great too. It's just about a balance, I guess. You know, are you just reaching for the fake stuff because you don't have the real stuff? Yeah.
Got it. Now, how do you as a therapist help your patients determine that and to create more of the real dopamine than reaching for it? How do you work with them for that? Or how do you do that?
I mean, I think helping them focus on building more of that real dopamine. So finding those meaningful activities and nurturing relationships and setting achievable goals, all that kind of stuff of really trying to impact their environment and what they're taking in a way that's sustainable. But, you know, also being able to be realistic that sometimes you're just having a really bad day and it sometimes, you know, some going and getting yourself a little coffee feels good. And maybe that can even turn some things around right there. But just knowing the difference between those things and helping them discern that.
That's great. I love that analysis. So I thank you for sharing that because I think that's good to bring into our awareness. Now, lastly, Lauren, before we go, I can't believe the time has gone so quickly, but I would love it if you could impart on our listeners what you've learned about women and their resilience throughout your career and experience.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, just working with people that have been through just the most unimaginable things. Like I'm so in awe of the clients that I've worked with and seeing them rebuild from nothing or healing from unimaginable trauma. And there's such a strength to that I think society can often underestimate. And being able to see them form that connection to themselves and to others and to a purpose and support each other. It's just, it's amazing. You know, I think that it's just good for people to know that that is so possible, that it doesn't take, I mean, so many clients that their circumstances outside of their control are still really hard. And the amount of growth I've been able to see people with, even within those circumstances, is just incredible. And anybody can get that. Anybody is capable of that.
Which is good to know. And lastly, Lauren, where can our listeners find you for more information and resources?
Yeah, I'm pretty active on social media. I try to share things that kind of like today, you know, that really complex concepts. I try to make it easy to understand or relatable, or always making sure that it's really research backed and accurate, because I know there's a lot of inaccurate stuff out there. So that's really my goal. On Instagram, I'm at your trauma therapist _. TikTok, it's just your trauma therapist. That's where I'm most active. And also my website is steadfastcounseling.com. And then I also have a Substack that I put out weekly with, if you are wanting more in-depth information, and it's all linked on everything. But the Substack is your trauma therapist as well.
And And where are you located? Because I think you can see patients in Florida and Illinois. Is that correct?
I can, yeah. So
Good.
I'm located in Illinois, but I also have a teletherapy license specifically in Florida. So I can do telehealth anywhere in Florida, and in Illinois, I can do telehealth or in person.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for that.
Mhm.
We have reached the end of our show today. We really appreciate your time. And thank you so much, Lauren Auer, for joining us to discuss leaving an unhappy marriage and what type of therapy is best for this situation, and explaining to us brain spotting, as well as dopamine. I really like that last little bit. So thank you so much.
Yeah, of course, anytime.
And listeners, if you or someone you know is going through divorce or is thinking about a divorce in the Northeast Florida area, please reach out to us at floridawomensLawGroup.com. You'll find our practice areas and the link to our website in the show notes, as well as Lauren's links. Thank you for listening.